Evan Simon, everybody. What's up, Evan?
Thanks so much
Welcome,
for having
Evan.
me.
Yeah. That was Kim saying hi, and John, you've spoken to already. So I watched the trailer for this, and I've read a little bit about it. I can't wait to sit down and watch the documentary. You'll pardon me. I was at YouTube University all weekend, so I didn't have any time to see the full documentary. But maybe in a way that's good because I can ask you questions that the audience might have as well. Tell me then, I mean, first of all, the process of getting this story looked incredibly dangerous for you and your crew.
Yeah, there were a lot of obstacles along the way, and thankfully we had a really strong local team that was able to navigate us through it all. But yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that, and thanks again for having me on the program. It's great to be here. Essentially, we were trying to take a look at this emerging world of ethical certification, specifically in the world of coffee. And we wanted to take a look at one of the most prolific regions for producing so-called ethically certified coffee. And when I say that, I think many of your listeners might recognize these stamps that you'll often find in the grocery aisle, things like Rainforest Alliance certified or Fair Trade certified. Those are two of some of the biggest names that folks might realize. And we wanted to take a look at what life was like on the reality, what was like on the ground for producer countries such as Mexico, which the southern state of Chiapas is sort of the beating heart of ethically grown coffee in North America. And so we went down there. This is, it's definitely a beautiful place that I'd encourage your listeners to go to, or I'm sure some of them are already aware of it. It does have a lot of history of struggle and poverty that's baked into that area. But it's a fascinating place to go. And the ethically certified coffee world has really proliferated there, specifically Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade. So we wanted to take a look at some farms down there that we had gotten some words that there were some reports of child labor and farmers living in poverty on these ethically certified farms. And so we wanted to see for ourselves. And so we went down. We had the help of another great California-based journalist, John Carlos Frey, who's been really covering this for almost a decade now. And he was a huge asset to us on the ground and definitely helped us navigate some hairy situations as well.
Yeah, I mean, it looked, as I say, like there was real threat of physical harm to you and your crew as you were going through this. So I can only imagine. I mean, there has to be sort of a commitment to power through whatever. I mean, are you? And I want to get to the sort of the conscience cleaning that we all do with so many things. We get what's called, free range chicken, or we'll get, any number of things, cruelty free this or whatever. And this falls into that category of, having been certified as environmentally friendly and as part of a process that has minimal of a negative effect on the environment and also minimal negative effect on society. So this sort of, to me, is that kind of greenwashing that we do, I think, in large measure. But so I want to double back to that, but I want to ask you about how you knew you were likely going to be facing physical threats to you and your crew, right?
Yeah, we had known from John Carlos Frey, his prior reporting on the issue, that this is, nobody really wants to have child labor exposed on their farm. And, it can have a lot of ramifications for that farm. And so they will often, the threat that had been expressed to us was that folks will really try to prevent that type of footage from leaving these mountains. And these are very remote areas of southern Mexico and Chiapas. And so we would basically go to these public roads where we knew workers would be leaving the dormitories of ethically certified farms to go and work on the fields, and they use a public road on the way there. And so we would essentially go before, and this is sort of one part of a year-long investigation, but to just get at this issue that you're asking about, we sort of staked out these farms on this public road before sunrise out in the middle of the jungle, and then waited for the workers to emerge from the dormitories and then walk to the fields on the road, at which point we could talk to them, we could document and see sort of if there were children amongst them. And sure enough, immediately there were about a dozen children walking out with their parents, and some of them alone as well, carrying their own baskets. And it's important to state that under the rules of the ethical certifier in this case, which was Rainforest Alliance, farms like this one, which rely on a large migrant workforce, often have families coming to live with them. That's not out of the usual. But what is supposed to happen is that these children are supposed to be in childcare or school while their parents work, not working an 8-hour shift in the jungle beside them. And it's really important to also understand that I would just say this as well, that, the parents and the families that are involved with, having incredibly difficult choices to put your child to work. I think for someone, here in America, I think that's often a much harder reality for us to grasp, but we have to recognize these are families that are often leaving Guatemala, taking very dangerous journeys to get to these farms in the first place. They have very little other option but to bring their children with them. And often having an extra set of hands is a way that the family keeps themselves fed as a whole. So it's a really complicated, issue that's hard to sum up briefly, but it is important to note that these children under Mexican law and under the Rainforest Alliance policies were not supposed to be working there, and that was evident to anyone that would go and be on the side of that road that day.
But that puts it in a nutshell, though. The families have an interest in their kids working on some level in some cases, because that brings in more money to a family that's already subsistent. Existing, right? So as you say, there's some complexities here. By the way, we're talking to Evan Simon. If you're just joining us, his documentary is part of a Nightline offering on Hulu. It's called Impact. So that is to say, that's the series is called Impact by Nightline, and it's on Hulu. But this particular episode is Caffeine Jungle, and as you say, I was saying before, sort of a great personal peril. These guys went down there, Evan and his crew. And you got to travel, I think, with a pretty lean crew to, make it through these very tough spots to reveal the story. So now to the ethical part of this, because this really is, as I say, it's a kind of ethical washing that we do with these certifications that don't necessarily reflect accurately what's happening with the product we're purchasing, in this case, coffee. So I presume you follow up with those that do the certification.
Yes, absolutely. We had extensive communication with both Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade International about what we found on the farms that we visited there. It's important to note that we did not find child labor on Fair Trade International farms. We found farmers making about $1,000 or $2,000 a year as Fair Trade International farmers and struggling to get by on that. But it is a different set of sort of findings there. But I would say that we reached out to both of these groups extensively. Fair Trade International did sit down with us, and we conducted an extensive interview with them. I think what is really important to just say about all of this in regards to what ethical certification means and is, without giving you too much of a history lesson, essentially, this was brought out to fill a gap that government oversight was not filling. The idea was that in the 90s, sort of in the post-globalism world, where all of these sort of global South countries, as we sometimes refer to them, were entering into markets with the global North, and then we saw a lot of reports of child labor, sweatshops, things like that. There was a huge uproar at that time, and instead of seeing a lot of international government oversight around these issues, what we saw was sort of an attempt at a sort of free market solution, which was the ethical certification industry. This idea that we can create certification labels that will verify ethical and socially responsible claims, so that consumers will have a much better alternative to sort of the standard issue global capital market, which
and so that producers, right, Evan, would have then an economic incentive essentially to clean up their act.
Yes, absolutely. It's expensive to invest in this type of, whether it's a certain type of sustainable agriculture or labor laws for these producers. It's an expensive to get up to these certification standards, and they wanted to be able to demand a higher price at market as a result. And that was the whole idea. And what, unfortunately, it seems that a lot of academics and researchers that have looked at this is that they found that it's systematically failing to prevent human rights abuses or provide things like living wages or assurances that there is no child labor involved with something, especially like coffee. It's been known for some time that child labor is a big part of coffee production. That's not news. What is sort of different now is that we have these ethical certification groups. When you pick up that stamp, you expect that, I would assume, that there might not be child labor involved with that kind of product, that the farmers would be making a living wage. And unfortunately, those realities seem much further off than the promises that have been offered. And so just getting back to your original question, sorry, is that Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, both sat down with us, or sorry, Rainforest Alliance did not sit down with us, but they did offer, a lot of information and statement regarding their policies. They've adopted an assess and address approach to child labor, essentially, which goes beyond simple prohibition, helps farmers identify and address the root cause of child labor. They ultimately canceled the certification of 3 farms where we identified child labor at. They say basically that their system does not promise to be infallible and that they're trying hard to correct this issue. I think Fair Trade, what they talked to us about really was these ideas that tackling the concept of a living wage is far more is very, very difficult for one organization to do, and that they sort of pointed to this being a very structural problem that the region faces. I think what critics have said, and what some academics and researchers that we spoke to said, is that, well, that subtle picture that you're painting of basically there being limitations to these goals are not often conveyed to the consumer. And in fact, when you look at some of the promotional materials that these organizations put out, they do not have sort of a lot of disclaimers about there might be child labor involved, there might be a non-living wage going on. It's often very, flowery language, glossy PR that makes you believe that you are doing something when you tackle these issues by buying these ethically certified products. And what we've found, and what other academics and researchers have found, is that is not an assumption that we can make, essentially. And I think that's the last thing I'll just say, is that the big takeaway that I would have for any of your listeners that are wondering, oh, I really want to be able to, do something with my dollar to help farmers and to help people on the bottom of supply chains. I think that, the takeaway here should not be to start boycotting the ethical certification industry. It's really to just have a sobering up moment as consumers as well, to know that you can't really pat yourself on the back when you buy this stuff. You've got to, if these things are valuable to you, you have to go further than that. And I think that even the certifiers would agree with that as well.
Someone was asking about, is Colombian coffee tied to the cartels? Can we buy Hawaiian coffee? I mean, this is the world of what are the alternatives? Does this affect? It would seem I would suggest that what your documentary really tells us is that this is going on across the board. You've just identified it in these places in rural Mexico, but it has to be going on elsewhere as well.
Well, I do want to be careful about what we found. We found stuff in southern Chiapas, in Mexico. That's where our zone was. But there has been extensive reporting on this happening in the Ivory Coast as well, especially in regards to ethically certified chocolate. The Washington Post has done a lot of remarkable reporting there. This is definitely has been touched upon globally. There's also issues with Indian tea estates on certain ethically certified regions that a lot of British news outlets have done. If you do a little bit of digging, a little bit of scratching into this world, essentially, you start to see that it's a lot more complicated than what the advertisements and sort of even our own consciences want us to believe. I think we all want these things to be true. We just have to question how effective they really are at this stage.
There was a
Kim had
article.
Something for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there was an article recently within the last year about the similar incidents with palm oil and children, not even teenagers, but children with scythes climbing up these trees and doing this really dangerous work. And that, even though it was certified that we weren't supposed to have this happen, that, as you mentioned with coffee, that families needed these kids to work and the kids needed the money, and so it was happening. And this is the palm oil that then went up in Scout cookies, and then so you have here girls in America profiting off the backs of children in other parts of the world making palm oil. So it caused a problem in my house with my Girl Scout, who then refused to sell the Girl Scout cookies. So it's it's all over the place, as you mentioned.
It's really, sorry, I completely agree. And it's a really complicated effort to try to understand essentially what it means to have a lot of commodities that are tied to developing in global South countries that are the main producers, where we are the main consumers. Essentially, you have a number of commodities, a number of products where the global North, wealthy folks like you and me, are the main consumers, and we want to keep the prices in these producing countries as low as they possibly can be. That's sort of a universal trait of sort of our market as we know it today, and it causes, when we look at the real world ramifications across the board, they're really serious losers in that game, and they are often these producer countries where we want labor and resources to stay as cheap as possible often.
Well, and there's such an interest on the part of these countries, particularly when it comes to palm oil, but it's across the board. It could be whatever commodity, in exploiting those resources. I mean, especially in these emerging countries or underdeveloped countries, however you want to refer to them. This is fascinating. And again, this is part of a series on Nightline. It's a weekly news magazine that gives you hard-hitting investigations, and this is certainly one of them. It's called Impact by Nightline. So it's out of ABC News. Unfiltered, straight-to-the-source reporting is what they say. This is, again, a one episode called Caffeine Jungle, but it's part of this series. So you'll find it on Hulu under Impact by Nightline, and check out Caffeine Jungle. Evan, so good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're the real thing, my friend. Award-winning producer and journalist, the son of another award-winning journalist, as I recall. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah, I believe you had him on recently.
Your father is one of the most respected journalists in the history of our medium of television. That's Jim Avila. So really cool that you're not only carrying on the tradition, I'd suggest you've hit even greater heights. But maybe that for the next time.
I doubt that very much. It's hard, but I'm also happy to say it's my grandfather was also a radio journalist, so it's a trait in the family I'm happy to carry on.
It really is a rich tradition. Evan Simon, good luck with it. Caffeine Jungle. Find it on Hulu under the ABC
Thanks,
Impact. Yeah, thanks, Evan.
Thank you so much. Drops every Thursday. Sorry, I forgot to say that. Thank you so much.